The wind blew sharp and dry across the open plains as dusk settled over the town of Dry Creek. The sun, a fading orange ember on the horizon, cast long shadows across the weathered fence posts and rolling hills. A lonely figure rode slowly along. The edge of his land, hat pulled low and eyes weary, Eli Granger, a widowed rancher who hadn't smiled in years. His ranch stretched for miles, a quiet, empty place that once rang with laughter and life. But that was before the fever took his wife, Clara, and their little boy Samuel in the same bitter winter. Since then, Eli had spoken to no one more than he had to his horses. He didn't expect much from life anymore, just routine, solitude, and the hum of crickets as the day died. That evening, Eli was heading back home after checking his northern fences when something unusual caught his attention. A sound he hadn't heard in years. Crying. At first, he thought it was the wind whistling through the grass. But then it came again, high-pitched, shaky, human. He reined in his horse, narrowing his eyes toward the abandoned tracks that bordered his property. The rail line hadn't been used in months since the cargo company pulled out, but the rusting rails remained a strange line drawn across the land. The crying grew clearer. 2 voices, children. Eli's heart thudded uneasily in his chest. He dismounted, boots crunching on gravel as he moved toward the sound. A boxcar sat rusted and crooked, its wheels half sunk in the earth. Behind it, tucked beneath a wooden crate, were 2 small figures huddled, trembling, and soaked from the sudden rainstorm that had passed through earlier. A little girl, no older than 8, raised her head first. Her eyes were red, but they flashed with defiance. She shifted in front of her younger brother, who couldn't have been more than 5, shielding him from the tall stranger with the dust-covered hat. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice hoarse. Eli didn't answer right away. The girl's dress was torn at the hem, and both children were barefoot. The boy clutched a dirty cloth towel to his chest like a lifeline, his face streaked with grime and tears. "I ain't gonna hurt you," Eli said quietly, his voice rusty from lack of use. "What are you 2 doing out here all alone?" The girl didn't answer. She only held her brother tighter. Eli exhaled slowly, pushing back the memories that surged forward. The feeling of holding his own boy that small, the scent of Clara's bread baking in the kitchen, the sound of Samuel giggling as he ran barefoot through the pasture. It was all gone now. But these 2 children strangers stood there like ghosts from a life he'd lost. "You got folks nearby?" he asked. Still. No answer. The boy whimpered and leaned into his sister. She wiped his face with her sleeve, never taking her eyes off Eli. "Well," he muttered, scratching the back of his neck, "ain't no place for young'uns out here. Coyotes been prowlin'. Nights get cold." He looked at them a moment longer. He hadn't meant to care, hadn't meant to get involved. But something in the way that girl squared her shoulders and something in the boy's helplessness pierced right through the thick wall he'd built around himself. "You can stay the night at my place," Eli said, voice gruff. "Just for tonight. Warm food, a dry bed. Then we'll figure the rest out." The girl hesitated, then slowly stood, pulling her brother with her. She didn't say thank you. She didn't even nod. But she walked toward him. Eli lifted the boy onto his horse first, then helped the girl up behind him. The horse shifted nervously, unused to the extra weight, but obeyed. Eli walked alongside them, leading the animal through the dimming twilight back to his house, a small, weathered structure nestled beside a windmill and a tired barn. Inside, he stoked the fire and served up beans and cornbread. The girl made the boy eat first, watching his every bite. When she was finally sure he was full, she began to eat, chewing slowly, like she hadn't tasted real food in days. Eli didn't ask more questions. Not that night. As the children curled up together on the old couch under a patchwork quilt, Eli stood near the window, staring out into the darkness. Something strange was happening inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just pity. It was purpose. And that scared him more than he cared to admit. Eli Granger didn't sleep much that night, even with the children safely tucked under a quilt on the old parlor couch. His mind wouldn't rest. He paced the floorboards of his quiet house, now filled with the soft, rhythmic breathing of two strangers who had no business being out there by the tracks, and certainly no business stirring something in him he thought was long dead. Every time he passed the doorframe, he'd pause to glance at them. The boy Tommy. He'd heard the girl whisper slept with his thumb in his mouth and that dirty doll clutched tight against his chest. The girl Emma, if he caught it right, slept lightly, one hand draped protectively over her brother, the Chungchura, other curled under her cheek. They reminded him so much of his own son Samuel, of how Clara used to tiptoe into his room at night and kiss his forehead, whispering things Eli never quite understood until she was gone. A kind of tenderness that made sense only after it was too late. At sunrise, L.A. brewed strong coffee and stood out on the porch. The land stretched endless before him, golden grasses swaying in the wind, the barn door creaking softly, and the chickens clucking in their pen like they hadn't noticed anything had changed. But everything had. By the time he stepped back inside, the smell of cornbread warming in the skillet had roused the children. Emma sat upright, eyes alert, scanning the room before checking her brother. Tommy still slept. She smoothed his hair gently, then looked up at Eli. "You didn't leave," she said, more like a fact than a question. "No," he replied. "Didn't plan on it." She eyed the pan. "Is that for us?" "I don't reckon my appetite's as big as it used to be." Emma nodded, still suspicious. But her eyes lingered on the food. Hunger had a way of softening pride. As they ate, L.A. sat in silence across from them. The girl ate slowly, like every bite needed to be justified. She kept sneaking glances at her brother, like she still didn't trust he'd be safe, even in sleep. After the meal, Eli said, "I need to check the livestock. Y'all are welcome to stay inside. Firewood's by the stove. Don't touch the rifle." Emma's head snapped up. "We ain't thieves." Eli blinked, caught off guard. "Didn't say you were. Just saying what needs saying." He grabbed his hat and stepped outside, but his thoughts stayed in the house. He didn't want this. He didn't need this. He had survived loss by shutting the world out. Letting anyone in, especially two fragile children, felt like lighting a fire near a house built from dry straw. Still, something deep inside was unraveling. The way the girl stared down fear with steel in her eyes. The way the boy didn't flinch when Eli lifted him onto the horse. Those were the things that stirred something in the rancher that he didn't recognize anymore. Later that day, as the sun grew high, Eli returned to find the children outside. Emma was hanging wet, clothes on a line that hadn't seen use since Clara passed. Tommy was chasing a butterfly through the tall grass, giggling faintly. "You do laundry?" Eli asked, a little amused. "I don't like smelling like railroad grease," Emma said. "And he only had one shirt." Eli watched her for a moment, then said, "The creek runs clean. You can bathe there if you're careful." Emma froze for a second, unsure if it was an offer or an order. "We won't stay long," she said stiffly. "Just until we figure out what to do." Eli nodded slowly. "Right." But he already knew that was a lie. From the moment he saw them by the tracks, their fates had started to tangle with his own, whether he liked it or not. That night, after supper, Emma finally asked, "Why'd you stop?" Eli looked up from cleaning an old bridle. "Back there." "By the tracks?" She nodded. He shrugged. "Guess I heard something I couldn't ignore." "Even though you didn't know us?" "Even then." Emma stared at him a while, then said quietly, "Most folks don't stop. Not anymore." Eli didn't answer. But something in her voice, a mix of disbelief, sorrow, and fragile hope, hit him hard. She was right. Most folks didn't stop, but maybe he wasn't most folks anymore. 3 days passed. Eli hadn't planned for them to stay beyond one night, but somehow one night turned into 2, then 3. Each morning, he told himself he'd ride them into town, hand them over to the sheriff or maybe the preacher's wife. But asked him if. Each evening, when the boy's head rested on his shoulder or Emma silently folded laundry like she belonged there, the words just never came. The ranch hadn't been this quiet in years, but it wasn't the old kind of quiet anymore. It wasn't empty. It was filled with the scratch of pencil on paper as Emma practiced letters at the kitchen table, with the squeaky hinges of the barn as Tommy followed Eli to feed the animals, with little feet on wooden floors. And sometimes, even laughter. Still, Eli knew he was only holding part of the truth. And that truth mattered. He sat on the porch one evening, whittling a piece of cedar as Emma came outside with a bucket of water. She'd been more helpful than most grown women he'd met, cooking, sweeping, keeping Tommy close. But she never spoke about where they'd come from, or why they'd been left alone. Eli waited until she set the bucket down. "Emma," he said, gentle but firm, "you're a strong girl, but I can't help you unless I know what happened. Why were you two alone out there?" Emma stiffened. She looked down at her bare toes in the dirt. "We don't need help." "I think you do. We can take care of ourselves." "I believe that," he said softly, "but it don't mean you should have to." Her arms folded over her chest. "We were going to Abilene. Mama said our uncle was there. She was sick. She put us on the train before she passed. Said he'd meet us." Eli set the knife down slowly, "But he didn't show?" Emma shook her head, jaw tight. "We waited a long time. When no one came, I tried asking the conductor, but the train was leaving. They told us to get off. Said it wasn't their problem." "So you walked?" She nodded. "We tried to follow the tracks, but Tommy got tired. We stopped, then it rained. You know the rest." Eli exhaled. It was worse than he thought, not just abandoned. Laid to, left behind. Children riding steel. Rails with no destination but survival. And your uncle? You know his name? James Barnett. That name meant nothing to Eli, but it would to the sheriff. Eli rubbed his forehead. "You should have told me sooner. I didn't know if I could trust you." Her voice was small now, not angry. "Just tired. People don't usually mean what they say." That stung more than he expected, and he deserved it. He hadn't earned her trust, not yet. "Emma," he said, leaning forward, "you don't owe me anything, but I promise you this no matter what happens. I won't let anyone hurt you or your brother." She didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either. That night, after tucking Tommy into bed, Emma lingered by the door. Eli looked up from the fire. "Is it okay?" she asked. Almost a whisper. "If we stay a little longer?" Eli nodded, his voice rough. "Yeah, as long as you need." The next day, Eli rode into town with a tight chest and a scribbled name in his pocket. He asked around about James Barnett. The responses weren't good. "Barnett? Ain't seen him in a while, but last I heard, he was drinking and dealing cards over in Hollow Ridge." "Bad sort," someone muttered. "Wouldn't trust him with a mule, let alone kids." The sheriff raised an eyebrow when Eli brought it up. "You saying you've got 2 runaways hiding out at your place?" "They ain't hiding. They're waiting," Eli said. "And they're not runaways. They're abandoned. You plan to keep him?" Eli looked the man in the eye. "I'm just looking out for him, same as I would for any soul left out in the rain." The sheriff leaned back. "You better hope that uncle don't come sniffing around. Could get messy." Eli tipped his hat and left without another word. Messy or not, He'd already made up his mind. Back at the ranch, Tommy met him at the gate, smiling with a piece of cornbread in his hand. Emma watched from the porch, not smiling, but not frowning either. He tied his horse, walked past them both, and into the kitchen. There was a loaf cooling on the windowsill and a worn chair with a handmade quilt draped over it. Eli stared at that quilt a moment. It had been Clara's, and somehow it felt like she'd set it there herself, like she knew. The house was full again. The ranch was starting to feel different. It wasn't that Eli had redecorated or planted anything new. The walls were still faded pine. The curtains still had sun-bleached edges. The only pictures were the ones Clara had hung years ago, her parents, their wedding day, and a small photograph of Samuel holding a baby chick, beaming with pride. But somehow, with Emma and Tommy moving through the space, life began to leak back into the cracks of everything Eli thought was dead. That morning, Eli stepped into the barn to find Tommy curled up beside his old sheepdog, Rusty. The boy had fallen asleep holding a piece of hay, and a toy wooden horse Eli hadn't even realized was still in the loft. He froze for a second, his chest tightening. That little horse. Samuel used to carry it everywhere. He'd ride it across the hearth, make neighing sounds, and even tried to feed it mashed potatoes once. Clara never let Eli throw it out. Now Tommy had found it, loved it instantly, like it had been waiting just for him. Eli knelt beside the boy, brushing back his hair. He didn't wake, just sighed and curled deeper into the warmth of the dog's side. Same age Sam was when he got that horse. Eli muttered under his breath. He stood up and walked back to the porch where Emma was hanging socks on the line. You? Always up this early? She asked without looking at him. Old habits, he replied. Ranch doesn't run itself. She nodded, pinning a sock with careful fingers. Tommy found a wooden horse. He won't put it down. I noticed. Did it belong to your boy? Eli swallowed hard. He hadn't talked about Samuel in years, but something about this girl quiet but sharp made silence feel dishonest. Yeah, he said finally. His name was Samuel. He passed when he was 6. Emma was quiet. Then softly, was it the fever? Yeah, I'm sorry. Eli nodded once. Me too. Emma looked up. Does it hurt to see Tommy with his toy? He thought about lying, saying no, but he respected her too much for that. Yeah, he said. It does. But it also feels, right? Like maybe that little horse still had more rides left in it. Emma gave a tiny smile. Tommy thinks it's magic. Said it helped him sleep better. Eli chuckled dryly. Samuel used to say the same. They stood there for a moment, side by side, listening to the wind push through the prairie. Later that afternoon, Eli brought Tommy into the barn with him to check the goats. The boy was shy at first, trailing behind and holding tightly to the toy horse. But when Eli handed him a small tin bucket and asked him to help collect eggs, the boy lit up like a lantern. Be gentle, Eli said as Tommy reached under the hen. She'll peck you if she thinks you're tacking her treasure. Tommy nodded seriously, and with slow fingers he eased an egg into the pail. Attaboy, Eli said, ruffling his hair. The boy beamed. I'm a rancher now? Close enough. Eli grinned. You're on your way. Watching the boy chase chickens and point out clouds that looked like horses, something warm and painful stirred in Eli's chest. It was joy, yes, but also grief. Grief if this felt familiar. That he knew what it meant to hold a small hand while showing someone the world. That somewhere deep down he'd missed being called Pa. That night, Emma helped make stew her mother's recipe, she said. She moved like someone twice her age, slicing vegetables and stirring the pot without needing help. She reminded Eli of Clara in her quiet strength. As they sat down to eat, Tommy looked up from his bowl. Can we stay here, Mr. Eli? He asked. I like it here. Eli's heart clenched. Emma froze mid-bite. Eli cleared his throat. Well, we'll see. Son, just taking it one day at a time. Tommy nodded, satisfied. Okay, but I'm gonna name my horse Eli Jr. Eli nearly dropped his spoon. Emma giggled, the first true laugh he'd heard from her. Later, when they were both asleep in front of the fire, Eli sat alone on the porch, staring at the stars. He remembered holding Samuel's hand on nights like this, pointing at constellations and making up stories. Now he was holding someone else's hand, and it didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like healing. Slow, unexpected, real. He wasn't their father, but he was starting to wish he could be. The peace at the ranch didn't last. By the fifth day, word had begun to spread. Dry Creek was a small town, and nothing stayed quiet long, not even kindness. When Eli rode into town for supplies, the change in the air was immediate. Folks who usually just nodded gave him longer looks, curious, skeptical. Some were whispering before he even tied his horse outside the mercantile. Inside, old man Grady behind the counter narrowed his eyes as Eli set down a bag of coffee and a tin of flour. You got company up at your place? He asked without pretense. Eli's jaw tightened. Some children needed help. Found him near the tracks. Grady raised a bushy brow. Heard you took him in, that true? Reckon it is. Grady nodded slowly, chewing on the corner of his lip like he was thinking hard. You sure that's wise, Eli? You don't know where they came from. Might be trouble follows him. Eli met his gaze. Trouble already did. That's why they were alone. Behind him, someone coughed loudly, clearly listening. Eli grabbed his things, paid in cash, and walked out, the stares burning into his back. On the street, he bumped into Sheriff Amos. The man tipped his hat but didn't smile. Granger, he said in a neutral tone. Heard you've got a couple. Kids holed up on your land. They're not holed up, they're staying dry and eating regular. That's more than they had before. The sheriff looked around, then motioned Eli to step aside. Look, I'm not saying what you did was wrong, but there are laws. If them kids ain't yours, and there's no legal guardian, it becomes the county's problem. Eli crossed his arms. And where would the county put them? In an orphanage 100 miles away, or split 'em up in some stranger's home? The sheriff sighed. It ain't perfect, but the law is the law. Well, the law can wait a damn minute. Those kids need time, and I'm giving it to 'em. Eli, Amos said, quieter now, you lost your family. I know you're still carrying that, but don't go filling that hole with something that might get ripped away. Eli stepped closer. I'm not filling holes. I'm doing right by 2 kids who were left for dead. The sheriff didn't press further, but Eli could feel it, the ticking clock. The pressure mounting. Back at the ranch, Emma sensed the shift in Eli's mood the moment he walked in. She looked up from where she was braiding Tommy's hair and asked, Someone say something? Eli hesitated. People in town are talking. Sheriff says he might have to get involved. Emma's face went pale. You said we could stay. I meant it, he said firmly, but I gotta do things the right way now. Tommy looked confused. Are they gonna take us away? No one's taking anybody anywhere, Eli said, crouching beside him. I promise you that. That night, Eli sat at the kitchen table long after the children had gone to sleep. He took out an old bottle of whiskey, untouched since Clara's funeral, and poured himself a shot. His hands shook slightly as he stared at the glass. Everything in him wanted to protect those kids. But protection wasn't enough, not with the law. He needed something real, permanent. So he did what Clara would have told him to do. He got up the next morning, hitched the wagon, and drove back into town, this time to see the lawyer. Adoption? The lawyer repeated, blinking. Yes. Eli said, I want custody of both kids. Do you even know their last name? Eli hesitated. Barnett, I think. They were supposed to be picked up by an uncle in Abilene. Never showed. The lawyer leaned back. Well, you've got to start, but this ain't a handshake deal. You'll need paperwork, signatures, maybe, even a court hearing. I'll do whatever's needed, Eli said, dead serious. The lawyer nodded. Then we'll get to work. As Eli stepped back out onto the street, the town felt different again. He wasn't hiding what he was doing anymore. He was fighting for it. Back home, he knelt by the fire and told Emma and Tommy the truth. That the sheriff might come. That a judge might want to ask them questions. But I'm going to do everything in my power to keep us together, he promised. Because you belong here now. Emma didn't speak, but tears welled in her eyes. Tommy reached out and rapped his arms around Eli's neck. And for the first time since Samuel's death, Eli hugged a child like he meant it, with all the love and fear that came with truly caring again. The morning light streamed across the fields, casting long golden rays over the ranch. It should have been a peaceful day, but Eli felt the storm coming. For the past week, he'd been chasing down answers, Emma and Tommy's history, their family name, anything that could help make their stay legal. The lawyer had warned him it wouldn't be easy, especially if their next of kin showed up. And that's exactly what happened. He came rolling in just past noon, dust trailing behind a rattling buckboard wagon. A man with a scruffy beard, red-rimmed eyes, and a whiskey bottle. Clinking at his feet, James Barnett. Eli stepped out from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. Emma and Tommy were in the garden. He told them to stay close but out of sight just in case. Barnett stumbled down from the wagon. His boots hit the ground like gunshots. You Granger? He slurred, voice sharp. I am. I heard you. Got my kin, Barnett said, squinting into the sun. That true? They've been staying here, Eli said cautiously, studying the man. You the uncle? Damn right I am. James Barnett. Their mama was my sister. Died near Wichita. Sent me a letter before she passed, told me to meet them in Abilene. But I was late. So what? They ain't yours to keep. Eli's jaw tensed. They were abandoned. Left to sleep under a crate by the tracks, scared, starving. You weren't. Just late you didn't show at all. Barnett's eyes narrowed. That ain't your place to judge, Cowboy. No? Eli asked. Then whose place is it when two kids are nearly dead from hunger while you're off drinking and doing God knows what? Barnett stepped forward. Their blood. That makes him mine. Eli didn't flinch. You so sure about that? You don't even know what Emma's favorite color is. Don't know Tommy still has nightmares and cries for his mama. The man hesitated. Eli pressed on. You don't want those kids. You want to feel like you ain't the kind of man who'd leave him behind. But you already did. Barnett's face twisted, torn between pride and guilt. He didn't say another word. Just spit into the dirt and stalked back to his wagon. You'll hear from me, he growled. You can bet on that. After the wagon disappeared in a cloud of dust, Eli walked back inside and found Emma sitting on the stairs, arms wrapped around her knees. She'd heard everything. Tommy peeked out from behind her. I knew he wasn't going to want us. Emma whispered, voice flat. Eli sat beside her, hands clasped. He doesn't know how to want anything, Emma. Not in the right way. And that ain't your fault. She looked at him with tired, guarded eyes. Are we going to have to go with him? Not if I can help it, Eli said. But there may be a fight coming, legal fight. And it'll help if folks hear your side. Emma turned her head. He's still blood, Eli's voice cracked. That doesn't make him family. The next few days were tense. Eli met again with the lawyer and the sheriff. As predicted, James Barnett had filed a claim in court, asserting his rights to the children. But something strange happened during that process. Emma finally opened up. She sat down with the lawyer in the parlor, dressed in her mother's patched old dress, and told the whole story from start to finish. Her mama's coughing, the train ride, the letter that said, "Wait in Abilene," the hours they spent crying alone, and how Uncle James never came. Tommy sat quietly beside her, gripping Eli's hand. "She made us promise we'd stick together," Emma said through tears. "She said we'd find a home if we didn't give up, but it wasn't with him." The lawyer was moved. The sheriff, too. Even the judge, when told, agreed to hear their testimony before making any ruling. Eli felt something shift. For the first time, it wasn't just about keeping them fed or sheltered. It was about proving in front of the world that they were a real family, even if not by blood. That night, after the lawyer left, Emma approached Eli at the porch. "Did you really mean it?" she asked. "Mean what?" "That we're not just strays you're helping out, that we could stay for good." Eli turned to her, the light from the lantern glowing across her freckled cheeks. "I meant every word. Emma, you and your brother. You came into my life like a lightning bolt. And now I can't imagine this place without you." She nodded, biting her lip to stop it from trembling. Then she leaned in and did something she hadn't done since she arrived. She hugged him. Eli, who once thought his heart was too broken to beat again, held her like a father holds his own. The courtroom smelled like old wood and damp paper. Eli Granger hadn't worn his Sunday suit since Clara's funeral, but today he'd ironed it as best he could. His boots were polished, his hat respectfully left in his lap. Beside him sat Emma in a clean blue dress and Tommy with a buttoned vest a size too big. They looked like they belonged anywhere but in court, and Eli would have given anything to spare them this. Across the aisle sat James Barnett, his beard trimmed, hair combed, and hands shaking slightly as he gripped his attorney's sleeve. But even in cleaned-up clothes, his eyes gave him away, red-rimmed, darting, uncertain. The kind of man who wasn't here out of love but out of pride. The judge, a weathered woman named Martha Hensley, entered and took her seat. Her gaze swept over the room like a hawk's. "We are gathered here to determine legal guardianship of the minors, Emma and Thomas Barnett," she began. "Let it be known, this isn't about blood alone. It's about who can offer them safety, stability, and a future." Eli's lawyer stood first. He spoke plainly about the children's abandonment, how they were found starving by the railroad, and the months they'd now lived under Eli's roof. He told the court about the adoption request and the town support. Then came James Barnett's lawyer, spinning a different tale, a grieving uncle who made mistakes but deserved a second chance. James nodded along solemnly. But when the judge asked why he hadn't searched for the children sooner, he had no real answer. "I didn't know where they were," he mumbled. "I thought they'd be in the system." "You mean you didn't go looking?" the judge clarified. James blinked, then stared at the floor. Then Emma was called to the stand. She was nervous at first, fingers twisted in her lap, voice barely above a whisper. But when asked about life on the ranch, something changed. "We get up early," she said. "We feed the animals. I help cook. Tommy helps with the goats." "And Mr. Granger?" the judge asked. "He doesn't yell," Emma said simply. "He never drinks. He always tells the truth. He lets me read at the table and lets Tommy fall asleep in his chair when he's scared." Judge Hensley nodded. "Do you feel safe there?" Emma's answer was strong. "It's the only place I ever have." Next came Tommy. He was small in the big chair and held his wooden horse the whole time. "Do you know Mr. Granger?" the judge asked gently. Tommy nodded. "He's my cowboy." Everyone smiled, even the bailiff. "Do you want to live with him?" Tommy's voice was confident. "Forever." Last came Eli. He stood slowly, hands steady. "I didn't go looking." To raise children again, he said. I'd lost mine, my wife. My boy. I wasn't sure I had anything left to give. He paused. But then I found these two out by the tracks, hungry, tired, and still holding on to each other like they'd fall apart if they didn't, and I knew I couldn't let 'em go. He looked toward Emma and Tommy. They've brought light into a house that had none. They don't carry my blood, but they've made their home in my heart, and I'd fight to keep them safe with every breath I've got. Silence followed. His words. Even James Barnett lowered his head. The judge returned after a short recess. Her voice was clear, unwavering. I've heard enough, she said. Though Mr. Barnett is a blood relative, he failed to act in the children's best interest. Mr. Granger, on the other hand, did. This court hereby grants temporary custody to Eli Granger pending completion of adoption proceedings. Tommy squealed and threw his arms around Eli's neck. Emma sat frozen, wide-eyed. Eli didn't speak. He just closed his eyes and held them both. Outside the courthouse, the town waited. Folks who barely spoke to Eli before were standing by the steps offering nods, handshakes, and even fresh-baked bread. It was the kind of welcome he hadn't felt in years. Emma looked up at him. Did we win? No, he said, smiling gently. We just started. She leaned against him, and Tommy took his hand. They rode home together in silence, wagon rolling over familiar dirt roads. The ranch came into view as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the hills, warm and golden like a promise, for the first time in a long time. Eli Granger didn't feel like a man trying to outrun the past. He felt like a father going home. The judge's decision had been made, but nothing about life afterward felt easy. Back on the ranch, the days resumed with chores, laughter, and the rhythm of healing, but Eli knew this was just the beginning of a longer fight. The court had granted him temporary custody, not full adoption. That meant social workers, home visits, and paperwork thicker than an old Bible. And James Barnett? He wasn't done yet. Within a week, rumors reached town that Barnett had hired a lawyer from Fort Worth, a man with a reputation for digging up dirt and twisting it into legal leverage. Barnett had already lost the children once, but now he was looking to win on a technicality. He's saying you're too old, Eli's lawyer told him bluntly over coffee in town. 54, widower, no next of kin. He'll argue that you're not stable, but the kids need younger folks. Eli just sipped his coffee and said, let him. But later that night, as he sat on the porch watching Emma chase fireflies and Tommy curl up with Rusty the dog, Eli couldn't shake the worry. What if the court agreed? What if they thought his grief, his solitude, his past made him unfit to be their future? Then came the social worker. Her name was Miss Duval Young, polished, with a clipboard and a tight smile. She showed up at the ranch gate 2 days later and stepped out of a shiny black car that looked ridiculous in the dust. Mr. Granger, she said, offering a hand. I'm here to assess the suitability of your home, Eli nodded. Well, it's not fancy, but it's honest. She made notes as she walked the grounds, checked the pantry, looked over the bunkhouse and barn, asked Emma what her favorite subject was, asked Tommy what his chores were. Tommy pointed at the chicken coop proudly. I count eggs. I'm the egg boss. Emma gave polite, practiced answers. She was smart. She knew what was at stake. Miss Duval turned to Eli. And what if something happens to you? Eli didn't miss a beat. Then I've made arrangements with Pastor Vaughn and his wife. They'll step in. But I ain't planning on leaving any time soon. She didn't smile, just wrote it down. That night, Eli tossed in his bed, the echoes of that question haunting him. What if something happens to you? It wasn't unreasonable. He'd built a life of solitude for a reason. But now he had kids to protect and the world. Didn't care how good your heart was, It cared how good your backup plan looked on paper. The next morning he rose before dawn, made breakfast, chopped wood, fed the animals. Same as always, but when Emma stepped into the kitchen, he sat her down. "Emma," he said, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honest." She looked up warily. "If they asked?" If someone said you could go live with a family in town, with new toys and a big schoolhouse and maybe a younger pa, would you want that?" Emma frowned. "Why would I want to go somewhere else?" "Because they might think you'd be better off. And I need to know you're not staying here just because you feel like you owe me." Emma stood up, angry now. "We don't want toys. We want you." Eli's throat tightened. "Then we're going to fight for that," he said softly. "Together." The next week, Miss Duval returned, but this time she wasn't alone. A surprise inspection. The Fort Worth lawyer, Mr. Langston, came too. Sharp suit, gold watch, the smell of city oil on him. James Barnett didn't come, he stayed in town. Eli figured he didn't want to look the children in the eye. Langston strolled through the ranch like he owned it, poked at loose boards on the barn, commented on the small bedrooms, asked loaded questions. "So, Mr. Granger, what makes you qualified to raise children alone at your age?" Eli didn't flinch. "Love, patience, a roof that don't leak, food on the table, and a heart that already calls 'em mine." Langston smiled like a snake. "That's not very legal." Eli stared him down. "Neither is leaving 2 kids to rot by the tracks." Emma stood quietly nearby. Fists clenched. Tommy reached for Eli's hand. Miss Duval took it all in, every glance, every tremble of emotion. When they left, Eli exhaled deeply. "That went about as bad as it could have." Emma shook her head. "You were perfect." Later that evening, the sheriff rode out to the ranch. He leaned against the post and said, "He's going to keep fighting, Eli." "I figured. But the townsfolk? They're with you now. And the preacher's talking up a petition. You got names. You got support." Eli nodded slowly. "Then maybe, just maybe, we'll have a chance." As the stars came out, Eli sat by the fire with Emma and Tommy curled beside him. The night air was cool, but not cold. He didn't know how long this battle would last, or how many more days they'd have together before a final ruling came. But he knew this. He'd fight until his last breath, because they were already a family, and nothing, not blood, not courts, not even time, was going to tear that apart. The battle was dragging on. Weeks had passed since the court hearing, and though Eli still had temporary custody, the final ruling was suspended pending further evaluation. James Barnett's out-of-town lawyer kept filing motions, digging through Eli's life like a plow through dry earth, trying to find anything that might prove he wasn't fit. Eli did his best to keep things normal. Mornings were for chores, afternoons for Emma's reading and math lessons, and evenings were spent around the fireplace. Tommy usually fell asleep mid-story, a dog on his feet and a quilt up to his chin. But Eli couldn't sleep much anymore. He kept worrying what would happen if the court turned cold. If a man like Barnett, who showed no love, no interest, just legal claim won custody because the world couldn't see what Eli saw. One night, while Emma and Tommy slept, Eli opened a drawer in Clara's old writing desk. Inside was a small wooden box carved with sunflowers. It was where Clara used to keep her personal letters, unsent notes, little prayers, dreams scribbled on torn paper. He hadn't touched it since she died. With shaking hands, he opened it. Inside were 3 folded notes, yellowed with time. But it was the last one, written in Clara's soft cursive and addressed to the one who comes after, that made his breath catch. He unfolded it. "If you're reading this and I'm no longer here, then I want you to know something. Love doesn't always look the way people expect it to. It doesn't follow rules or bloodlines. It's quieter than that. It shows up in chores and meals and warm quilts. It's in the hand you reach for in the dark. If someone finds their way to this home after I'm gone, if they need a place to rest, to grow, to be loved, then open the door. We built this ranch to be full of life. Don't let it go quiet again. Eli wiped his eyes. That was the sign he hadn't realized he was waiting for. The next morning, he rode into town and marched straight into the lawyer's office. I want to add something to our case file, he said. A letter from my wife. It ain't legal, but it's truth. The lawyer read it once, then again, slower. It's not standard evidence, he said, but it might sway the judge. It speaks to intent, to character. Then put it in. Eli said, I want the court to know who Clara was, who we were. A week later, the judge ordered one last court session. Barnett had filed a final appeal. Eli, Emma, and Tommy were summoned back this time. The courtroom was full. Word had spread through Dry Creek. People came to watch not out of curiosity, but support. The preacher, the blacksmith, even Grady from the Mercantile were there. Some brought their kids, sitting quiet in the gallery. Miss Duval was there too, her notes thick and her expression unreadable. Eli sat straight, but Emma reached for his hand under the table. I'm not scared, she whispered. Not with you here? He squeezed her fingers. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. I've reviewed all final filings, she began, including a personal letter submitted by Mr. Granger from his late wife. She looked up, her eyes sharp but kind. What struck me most wasn't its elegance, but its truth. The kind of truth that doesn't ask to be believed, because it simply is. That letter reminded me why we do this work. Why the law must serve the heart of the matter, not just the letter of it. She paused. Therefore, it is the ruling of this court that Eli Granger is hereby granted full legal custody of Emma and Thomas Barnett, with immediate adoption proceedings to follow. The courtroom erupted. Emma covered her face and cried. Tommy shouted, We get to stay.
Loud enough for the rafters to hear. Eli just closed his eyes,
let out a breath he'd been holding for months, and whispered, Thank you, Clara, outside. The sun was shining, and for once it didn't feel like a cruel joke. The townsfolk came one by one to clap him on the back, shake his hand, hug the children. Miss Duval approached last. I've worked a lot of cases, she said, but this one healed something in me too. Eli nodded. It's been a long road. You kept walking, she said. That's what matters. Back at the ranch that night, Emma hung the old letter in a frame above the fireplace. Tommy placed a drawing next to it, stick figures of the three of them and a dog, standing in front of a crooked house with a big red heart above it. The quiet that once haunted the ranch was gone. Now there was music in the rustling grass, warmth in the creak of the rocking chair, laughter in the walls, and in the firelight, Eli Granger finally believed what he'd only hoped was true. He hadn't just saved two children. They had saved him. The sun rose slower that morning. Not because time had changed, because, for once, no one was rushing. There were no court dates looming, no lawyers waiting, no fears shadowing the horizon. Just breakfast on the stove, the dog snoring by the hearth, and the sound of Tommy giggling while trying to butter toast without dropping it. Eli stood by the kitchen window, watching the mist rise off the fields. It had been 3 days since the court declared him the legal guardian of Emma and Tommy. 3 days since he walked out of that courthouse, not as a man who might become their father, but as one who was. And yet, even now, the weight of it hadn't quite settled in. You're smiling, Emma said, appearing beside him with 2 cups of coffee, one light with milk, just the way Clara used to make it. He took the cup. Guess I am. You don't smile much. I do now. She gave a quiet, pleased smirk, then walked outside to hang laundry in the soft breeze. That afternoon, the preacher came to the ranch, not with sermons or Bibles, but with papers. Official adoption paperwork now ready to finalize. The signatures were just a formality. But still, Eli read every line. He owed it to them. When he reached the final page, he paused. Full and unconditional adoption of Emma Rose Barnett and Thomas Eli Barnett. The name caught him. Thomas Eli Barnett? Emma glanced over. We picked it, Eli blinked. You did? Tommy said he wanted to be your boy. So we asked if we could take your name. His throat tightened. I didn't expect that. Well, we did, Emma said plainly. You're the one who came for us. Stayed for us. Eli took the pen. He didn't just sign it, he pressed his name down with the full weight of his soul. That evening, the neighbors came, not for any occasion in particular, just a potluck. Just because. Families brought food and laughter and firewood. Kids ran through the fields. The preacher said a few kind words. And before long, Emma had a flower crown on her head, and Tommy was leading a goat around like it was a parade float. Grady from the mercantile handed Ellie a carved wooden plaque. Granger Ranch Est. Again, 1887. You built this place. Once with Clara, he said. Looks like you're building it again. Eli stared at the words, fingers tracing the grooves. Yeah, he whispered. Looks like I am. When the stars came out and the guests trickled away, Eli sat on the porch while Emma put Tommy to bed. The ranch was quiet again, but this time, not the kind that echoed lost. It was peaceful. Alive. A wind stirred through the wheat fields, brushing over Eli like a memory. He pulled the old rocking chair closer to the edge of the porch. It creaked the same way it always had. Clara's quilt still lay folded on the armrest. He stared at the night sky, then softly spoke to the quiet. You'd like her, he said. She's got your fire, and that boy, he's all heart. A few stars blinked down in reply. Emma stepped out moments later. He's asleep, she said, tucking a shawl around her shoulders. Tried to make the goat sleep in his bed again. Eli chuckled. We may need a second barn. They sat in silence for a while. Then Emma said, You know, Mama always said the good things in life come like horses, fast, wild, and unexpected. But they stay only if you make a home for 'em. Eli smiled. Sounds like your mama was wiser than most. She was, Emma said. But she'd like it here. I think she'd say we're home now. Eli nodded slowly, deeply. Yeah, we are. And just like that, the story that began beside a lonely stretch of railway, 2 crying children in the cold, and a man who thought he had nothing left to give had become something none of them could have predicted. A family. Not by birth, not by plan. But by choice. By love. By the kind of grace that comes not from fate, but from opening your door when someone needs it most. And in a small ranch house surrounded by wild fields and second chances, a girl, a boy, and a broken-hearted widower found what so many search for and never find: a place to belong, a name to carry, and a home to call their own.